Compile Heart has certainly created several lackluster RPGs over the course of the years, and definitely overmilked some of their franchises, such as the Neptunia games, but if there's one of their games that really came out of the lot for being fun and different, it's definitely Fairy Fencer F, which first came out on the PS3 and later saw a remaster come out on the PS4. The game really wasn't anything special if you compare it to other RPGs that came out at that time, but keeping in mind Compile Heart doesn't have the budget other companies have, it was a super fun game with a great premise, a nice concept, a really entertaining and engaging cast of characters, and the battle system with the fairy transformations felt original and exciting. For what it was, Fairy Fencer F was delightful and probably Compile Heart's best game, or one of their best, despite the flaws in the small budget. Unfortunately for fans, despite the remaster on PS4, Fairy Fencer F never saw the awaited sequel it deserved. That is until now, almost 10 years later. But is the sequel really what fans were expecting? As a fan of the first game myself, I can only speak for myself, but the answer is both yes and no. You'll be happy to know that the old gang is back in the sequel, and they're as funny and out there as before, but there's one hiccup. There is no English dub this time around. This may disappoint a lot of people, as the English dub in the first game was part of the charm and really brought the characters to life. The Japanese dub is great, don't get me wrong, but Fang and his friends just feel a bit different now, like a little part of their personality is missing. The other point that is missing is that in the first game this felt like a real adventure, where you were on a quest and characters would join along the way, building up the party and storyline. Now, the new game has almost everyone already present from the start, so it doesn't have quite the same impact. Of course, there are new characters that join later, even enemies, so this is very fun, but you still start the game with many characters from the previous game, including their fairies, so there's a lot of people involved in the cutscenes, which are still numerous and lengthy. Actually, they felt even longer, to the point where I would say the game is almost half a visual novel and half a RPG. Or maybe they just felt longer because the story wasn't as compelling, or because of the lack of English dub. Either way, get ready for a lot of cutscenes. I wouldn't say that the story wasn't interesting, it definitely had its moments and went into unexpected directions at times, but the first few hours were a bit less engaging, recycling a similar plot to the first game where Fang and his allies are searching for furries. It takes a little while to catch in, but ultimately it's the characters that make the story interesting, their interactions are still refreshing and weirdly funny, and Fang is still, well, Fang. The new characters, including Fleur and all, are also a nice addition to the cast. That being said, this is more a game for fans as it's lacking the character introduction and build-up from the first game, but newcomers could still jump in as the plot is similar in nature. However, I would definitely recommend playing the original first, as you'd be missing on what made the series so appealing in the first place. Gameplay-wise, you'll be surprised or disappointed to learn that the new Fairy Fencer is completely different. It's no longer a dungeon crawler like most of Compile Heart's other games, but now a turn-based strategy RPG. This could be bad or good, depending on your tastes. Personally, I was a bit disappointed as I love Fairy Fencer's gameplay despite it being fairly generic. I like to be able to walk around, open treasure chests, battle the enemies, and just feeling like I was on a quest. Now all you have is the point-and-click map with some locations, map with grids, and battles. There's no more sense of exploring the world, but don't get me wrong, I also love strategy RPGs like Disgaea or Fire Emblem, but these games stick to their roots, so it's different. I'm not a big fan of completely changing a game's gameplay style unless it's a spin-off, but here we have a sequel that is very, very different. Is it bad? No, absolutely not, but it took me a little time to accept the change as I really loved Fairy Fencer as it was back on the PS3. Compile Heart isn't new to turn-based strategy either, as they also turned Neptunia into a strategy game back on the Vita with Hyper Devotion Noir, which was also developed by Sting, the same studio that made the new Fairy Fencer game, so you will feel similarities in the gameplay if you've also played that one. In that sense, Fairy Fencer Refrain Chord is a very generic strategy RPG. Not in a bad way, but it plays like most other games of this genre, with nothing that really sets it apart. That being said, it's really not a flaw in itself, and I found it fun and competent. It plays as I expected, with a large grid where you set up your characters one by one as their turn comes, attacking the various enemies and trying your best to overcome them. It's all very basic, but it's fun, and the game does have its own twists. For one, the fairy transformations are of course present in the game. As your turns advance, you will ultimately be able to transform and gain much more power over your foes. There's also a really cool new team attack called Avalanche that builds up over time, and it's really powerful, so you will want to be strategic and use it at the right time to make the most damage possible. Then there's a new character, Fleur, who is your muse and can power up your team with her songs as long as you are within her range. All that together makes the gameplay unique in its own way and keeps it engaging for the most part, but it does get repetitive after a while as the game is quite long with 25 chapters, and although the battles are fun, they remain the same for the majority of the game, taking place in the same areas and battling the same enemies most of the time. It also doesn't help that later fights start taking an extremely long time to complete, sometimes between 40 minutes to even an hour. The game isn't particularly hard, but even with the battles on the fastest speed option, I found it too long and slow. I wish enemies' animations could be skipped, or there was an even faster speed, or maybe I'm just too impatient due to having too many games to play. Either way, I found some battles dragged on near the end. To keep them interesting, however, you can do side quests and events to find more furries, and having more furries means more customization fun, if you like that. Although your characters can't equip much, you can however equip furries, which give you completely different skills and a really unique build. This aspect from the first game is still there and even better, although you'll need to grind a lot to keep up if you want to switch furries around. Personally, I didn't mess around too much and kept the same ones equipped as I didn't really feel like grinding too much since I felt the game was already long. The side quests are mostly just the same maps and battles anyway, so I didn't really feel like doing more of something that was already a bit repetitive. I do love the idea of the furries though, always loved them, and I'm really glad they're back. Graphically, the new entry looks good, but it's nothing really impressive. It looks similar to Advance Force on the PS4, so you know what to expect. The areas are simple but colorful, although a bit barren, and the character portraits look amazing as usual. The game runs very well, but I felt like the battle screen looked a bit chaotic when a lot of enemies were on, especially with the Muse song effect on. It was very hard to see what was going on with all these effects on the screen. The Muse song was also a bit annoying as it keeps playing over and over again, but I only realized at the very end that you can actually turn it off in the options. I wish I knew that in the beginning, so make note of that. Otherwise, the soundtrack was nice, but I wish there was more variety. All in all, Fairy Fencer Refrain Chord is a very different game, and not all fans will be happy with the new gameplay style, but if you like strategy RPGs, it's a fun one, although not a very complex one. The game retains the charm of the first, and it's engaging at times, although a bit repetitive at other times. I enjoyed it for what it is, but I see it more like a spin-off, and I will be waiting for Fang's next adventure, hopefully back to its roots.